Hey there, and welcome back to Earth Up, the little corner of the internet where curiosity gets comfortable, the lights get low, and science slows down enough to drift off with you. Tonight, we're heading somewhere your feet will probably never touch in this lifetime. Far, far south, past the last roads, past the last trees, past the last familiar stars, to a place wrapped in silence and snow. A place where the wind doesn't just blow, it sculpts. It carves long ribs into white plains, and the horizon looks less like Earth and more like a distant, frozen moon. We're going to Antarctica, the coldest, driest, most untouched wilderness on the planet, a continent of extremes. So empty that even sound seems to think twice before hanging around. You'll find no cities here, no neighborhoods glowing with windows at night, no highways humming in the distance, just ice, sky, and that low, almost physical quiet you only get where the world has run out of distractions. And yet, in the last decade or so, this vast sheet of white has done something unexpected. It's warmed people's imaginations, not just because of the penguins waddling along the shorelines or the towering blue cliffs of Broken Glacier, but because of something darker, stranger, and sharply geometric half buried in the snow. Shapes that look a little too clean, a little too deliberate, triangles rising out of the ice. Some people look at the photos and shrug. Mountains. Others lean in, eyes bright, and whisper a different word. Pyramids. Now, whether those outlines are just a work of wind and time, or something that was shaped on purpose by hands we no longer remember, the idea alone has been enough to lodge itself in millions of minds. Pyramids in Antarctica. It's one of those thoughts that makes even the most skeptical brain pause for a heartbeat, because it quietly opens a very old question. What if the story we tell about human history is missing a chapter? What if, long before we called this place unlivable, something flourished here? Not just moss and microbes, but builders, thinkers, a culture that knew this land when it was green instead of white. And what if the cold itself has been guarding their traces ever since, locking them away under glassy ice for tens of thousands of years? Before we wander too far into that possibility, I'd like you to check in with one small detail. Where are you listening from tonight? Maybe you're curled up somewhere warm under a blanket, where the thought of minus anything degrees feels far away and unreal. Maybe you're already in the middle of winter, listening as your own wind rattles the windows and the room glows softly around you. Wherever you are, see if you can bring a little of that comfort with you as we travel somewhere very, very cold. Because I'd like you to picture this. A continent so huge it holds about 70% of all the fresh water on Earth, frozen solid. So bright that it bounces away almost half the sunlight that hits it, like a giant mirror at the bottom of the globe. And yet, when you look at it on a map, it feels dark, not in color, but in mystery. A blank at the edge of the known world where legends seem to grow simply because there's room for them. If this kind of slow, quiet exploration helps you unwind, if it lets your thoughts drift while a little thread of curiosity stays softly awake in the background, it would mean a lot if you tapped like or subscribed. It helps this small, sleepy channel find other people who might be lying in the dark right now. Headphones in, following the same gentle voice through the same strange questions. So, settle in. Let your breathing ease up just a bit. Feel whatever warmth you got around you. A blanket, a hoodie, the weight of your pet sleeping nearby. And let it balance the chill of the place we're heading. Because tonight, we're following a trail that starts very small. A few blurry satellite photos, some coordinates on a screen, and an ancient pattern our minds are wired to notice. Somewhere between science and speculation, between mountain and myth, lies a quiet whisper under the ice. Like many modern mysteries, this one began not with a dramatic expedition, but with a pixelated image on a glowing monitor. Back in the mid-2010s, a series of satellite images began circulating online. They showed a stretch of Antarctica near the Ellsworth Mountains, endless white, folded and creased like frozen fabric, and there, breaking through it, a dark, sharply defined triangular peak. The edges looked clean. The symmetry was uncanny. It rose out of the snow with that unmistakable silhouette the brain instantly labels as pyramid. Before anyone had really measured or analyzed anything, the word was already attached, not just to one peak, but to three separate formations miles apart, that some people claim were positioned almost as if they'd been placed. It didn't take long for the internet to do what the internet does. Forums lit up, blogs speculated, videos zoomed dramatically in and out of grainy images, drawing lines and angles on the screen. Within days, theories started multiplying like snowflakes in a storm. At first, geologists stepped in the way they usually do, with patience and a stack of explanations. This wasn't new to them. Mountains all over the world take on triangular forms. It's what happens when erosion, gravity, freeze, thaw cycles, and the slow grinding weight of ice-shaped rock over millions of years. To them, this was a classic example of what's called a pyramidal nunatak, a rocky summit poking up through a deep sheet of glacial ice. Perfectly ordinary if you've spent your life staring at Earth's skeleton. But outside those circles, it didn't feel ordinary at all. People saw geometry where they expected randomness, smooth faces where they imagined jagged chaos, clean angles in a place they thought was all wild, unplanned, and untouched. The story caught on not because it was proven, but because it lived in that fragile little space between could be and probably not. A space where our need for meaning can easily outrun the available data. Antarctica has always held that kind of pull. For centuries, it was the last blank patch at the bottom of the map, an empty white question mark on old globes labeled with dramatic Latin, Terra Incognita, unknown land. Now, in an age where satellites can peer at almost every inch of the planet, it suddenly seemed to be offering something, a secret, or at least a shadow of one. Scientists could explain away the shapes with geology, but imagination doesn't thaw as quickly as ice. People began asking, what if, before Antarctica froze, it was home to something more than penguins and hardy moss? What if, like Egypt or Mesoamerica or countless other places, it once held builders who shaped stone into monuments that pointed toward the sky? From there, the speculation branched out in every direction. Some connected the idea to Atlantis or other lost continents. Others reached straight for extraterrestrials, star visitors who might have used the poles for some unknown purpose. Some imagined a forgotten civilization erased by an ancient cataclysm, a flood, a shift of the earth, a sudden freeze. Each theory found an audience, because deep down, a lot of us carry the same quiet hunger. We want our story to be part of something bigger. We look at pyramids in Egypt, in Sudan, in Mexico, in China, and the mind whispers, that can't just be coincidence. So when that same shape appears, even vaguely, in the coldest, farthest corner of our planet, the question naturally follows. If that pattern is here too, what does it mean for the story of civilization? Because even if those dark peaks turn out to be nothing more than rocks shaped by wind and ice, the idea of what might lie beneath them stirs something very old in us. It's that quiet belief that maybe we're not the first to walk this planet and look up at the sky with questions, that before our cities and satellites and screens, the world might have hosted other rises and falls. Civilizations that came and went, leaving only faint traces that nature has since folded away. The thought of it is strangely comforting and unsettling at the same time. Civilizations rising, flourishing, and then vanishing under waves or ash or, in this case, ice. It's one of humanity's oldest stories. We've been telling versions of it for as long as we've been telling anything at all. And every time a new whisper appears, a strange photograph, a rumor of buried geometry, the story takes a fresh breath. Imagine just for a moment that you're standing at the edge of one of these so-called pyramids. The air is so cold it feels less like wind and more like a solid thing pressing against your face. Your eyelashes catch tiny crystals every time you blink. All around you, the ice stretches out to every horizon, glowing under a sun that doesn't really rise or set, just circles slowly and endlessly. There's almost no sound, maybe just the soft crunch of your boots on compacted snow. Now and then, the deep, distant groan of a glacier shifting its weight, a continent-sized body rolling in its sleep. It's the kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. It feels aware, old, like the land itself is listening. And as you stare up at the dark, triangular slope, your brain keeps switching labels. Mountain, pyramid, mountain, pyramid. The shape feels deliberate, like something that was made rather than something that simply happened. You feel watched, Not by animals, not by people, but by memory itself, by time. But the scientific story is still there, waiting patiently for its turn. Those peaks that show up most often in Antarctic pyramid videos and blog posts, they're part of the Ellsworth Mountains, a long chain of rock that's been pushed up, folded, and worn down over tens of millions of years. They're not newcomers. They were already old when the first humans walked upright. Back when continents collided, the crust buckled upward, forming ranges like these. Then, over ages, glaciers flowed over them like slow rivers of solid glass, carving and grinding, shaving away pieces of stone. Where several glaciers cut into a peak from different sides, they can shape it into a sharp, pyramidal form. Steep faces, clear edges, almost architectural in their simplicity. The dark color in the satellite images, that's just exposed rock, showing through where the ice has thinned or retreated. The sharp-looking walls and edges are often just ridges and shadow, stretched and exaggerated by the low polar sun. In other words, this is geology doing what geology does, turning chaos into shapes that sometimes look like design. But here's the tricky part. Most people don't fall in love with perfectly normal geology. We fall in love with mystery. A mountain is impressive. A pyramid is a story. The word itself carries history. It pulls and echoes from Egypt, from Mesoamerica, from forgotten cultures, and careful alignments with stars. When we say pyramid, we're not just describing a shape. We're invoking builders, rituals, meanings, intentions. Intent implies intelligence. And intelligence implies connection. That somewhere, sometime, someone stood where we're imagining ourselves standing now and looked at the same sky. The emptier and more remote the place, the stronger our imagination rushes to fill it. After all, how many pieces of this planet are truly left unmeasured and unexplained? We've mapped the seafloor, walked on the moon, and zoomed in on cities from space. Antarctica stands out as one of the last great frontiers, an enormous, not yet at the bottom of the globe. And the human mind loves to turn frontiers into stories. In that sense, the legend of the Antarctic pyramid says less about what's hiding under the ice and more about what's hiding inside us. It acts like a mirror held up to our curiosity and our longing, our desire to weave ourselves into a single, sweeping narrative. Ancient builders, lost cities, mysterious alignments, all part of one continuous thread that runs right up to us lying here tonight, listening in the dark. We don't like the idea of blank spaces in history, empty centuries, lost beginnings. When we stare into the icy void at the bottom of the map, we're not just wondering what the ice is hiding. We're asking if our own origin story might be incomplete. Meanwhile, scientists keep doing something much quieter and much less dramatic looking. They drill, they drag long, shining cores of ice out of the ground. Cylinders taller than a person, layered like a frozen timeline. Inside those layers are tiny bubbles of air from thousands, even hundreds of thousands of years ago. Dust from distant volcanoes. Traces of ancient storms. The chemistry of past climates. They're not digging for pyramids or lost cities. They're digging for context, for the history of the planet itself. And what they find is not flashy, but it is astonishing in its own way. The Earth remembers everything, even when we don't. The ice holds record temperatures rising and falling, of oceans breathing in and out, of forests expanding and retreating. Buried lakes hold microbes that have been cut off from sunlight and air for unimaginable lengths of time, quietly surviving on the faint energy from rock and water. Antarctica, beneath its blankness, is more like an archive than a stage. A library where the books are written in layers of ice and stone. The idea that there might be something else down there. Structures, artifacts, proof of some long-lost culture, taps into that same sense of continent as a vault. It's easy to imagine that if anything could keep a secret for tens of thousands of years, it would be this place. But even if explorers someday dig into those pyramids and find only rock, no chambers, no carvings, no sign of human hands, the mystery won't really disappear. Because what we're chasing isn't a specific object. It's a feeling. The feeling that there's more to discover, more to figure out, more to imagine. Every blurry photo, every strange angle that sparks a rumor, keeps that feeling alive. It reminds us that in a world overflowing with information, where almost anything can be looked up in seconds, there are still corners that remain stubbornly unknown. Satellites will keep circling. The ice will keep moving, slowly, silently reshaping the land. Shadows will keep falling on those peaks in just the right way to make someone, somewhere, zoom in and wonder. Antarctica doesn't remember us. It doesn't need to. It's outlived everything before, and it'll outlast us too. It has survived every climate, every age, every slow rearranging of the continents. In a way, it's the planet's oldest storyteller. One that doesn't bother with words at all, just layers. When we gaze at that white expanse, we're listening to a story we can't quite hear yet. We feel it more than we understand it. Something vast and ancient humming underneath the thin noise of our lives. The question of the pyramids, like the questions of time or consciousness, or where exactly we draw the line between myth and memory, is just another way we ask, who are we, and how long really have we been here? The story drifts on, from grainy images to late-night theories, from skeptics explaining slopes and shadows to dreamers tracing invisible doorways in the snow, from what science can measure to what wonder stubbornly keeps open. Somewhere under all that ice, the truth rests. Maybe it's simple, maybe it's strange, maybe it's both. For now it sleeps, not impatiently, just there, waiting for curiosity, our curiosity, to reach a little farther. And if you listen closely, just underneath the wind moving over those silent slopes, you can almost imagine the sound it makes. A low, ancient murmur, not of secrets, not of messages, but a stone remembering sunlight, the whisper beneath the ice. There's a strange kind of comfort in knowing that the coldest place on Earth is also one of the quietest. Down there, under skies so pale they almost blend into the snow, sound behaves differently. The air is so dry and thin that it doesn't carry your voice the way you're used to. You call out, and your words feel like they fall around you instead of traveling out into the distance. Even your footsteps feel oddly muted, as if the ice is swallowing the noise as soon as you make it. But the silence isn't empty. It hums in its own way. Deep inside the ice, there are slow, endless movements. Glaciers expanding and shrinking with changes in temperature. Ice sheets grinding against rock. Tiny fractures opening and closing with loud cracks that no one hears. If you could speed up time, Antarctica would sound like a giant, creaking machine. The life of this place is not measured in days or seasons. The way it is where we live, it's measured in epochs, in ages, in slow, patient changes that don't care about our calendars. To understand why so many legends have grown out of this frozen desert, you almost have to imagine yourself standing there. You're surrounded by what looks like nothing, and yet you feel watched, not by eyes, but by time. Most people picture Antarctica as pure white, just a blank sheet of snow stretching to the horizon under a hard blue sky. And that's not wrong. But it leaves out some of the details you'd only see if you stayed long enough. Because there are colors here. Under certain light, the snow glows with shades of blue so deep they feel like you could fall into them. In cracks and crevasses, ice that's been compressed for hundreds or thousands of years turns a rich, glassy turquoise. In some places, faint green shimmer where ancient algae got trapped, little ghosts of life locked into the ice. And then there's the black. Not the soft black of the night sky, but the harsh, raw black of exposed rock. Dark ridges slicing through all that brightness. Jagged little islands of stone, refusing to be swallowed entirely by the ice. It was that darkness, those scattered black shapes, that helped spark the whole Antarctic pyramid idea in the first place. Because when you see them from a distance or from far above, those peaks stand out like memories that refuse to melt. Some of them are all broken and jagged. Others are smooth, rising from the snow at clean angles that look, at first glance, almost too precise. Under the right light, they really do look like the edges of pyramids cut from obsidian. Your rational brain might say, erosion did this. But your pattern-seeking brain whispers, someone made that. In reality, it's ice and stone collaborating slowly over unimaginable stretches of time. Glaciers grinding against mountains. Wind blasting loose material away. Freeze. Thaw cycles slowly cracking and chipping. Coincidence eventually arranging itself into something that looks like intention. Still, when your only view is a satellite snapshot with harsh shadows and high contrast, those shapes can feel almost designed. Even scientists, off the record, sometimes admit that the photos are uncanny at first glance. And that's the thing. The human brain is wired to recognize patterns long before it's ready to explain them. Now, what we can't see from space might be even more mind-bending than what we can. Antarctica doesn't just hide a few dark peaks. It hides an entire world of mountains, valleys, and ridges under the ice. A world more dramatic than some places we've actually walked on. Buried beneath miles of solid ice is a range called the Gamburtsev Mountains, an enormous chain that's completely invisible from the surface. No snow-covered peaks, no rocky ridges interrupting the horizon, just a flat white sheet. You could ski right over the top of them and never know. Scientists first discovered the Gamburtsev Range in the 1950s using radar. They sent radio waves down through the ice and listened for the echoes. The echoes came back with surprise. A full mountain chain, taller in places in the Alps, sealed away in darkness. It was like finding an entire hidden continent hiding inside the one we already thought we knew. When researchers mapped the shape of those buried peaks, they found familiar forms, ridges and slopes that look a lot like other ancient mountain ranges around the world. Only this one has been preserved under ice for millions of years, protected from rain, wind, plants, and most of the usual forces that wear rock down. So when people talk about hidden pyramids and secret structures beneath the ice, maybe what they're really reaching for is that same feeling the Gamburtsev discovery stirred. A sense that something massive and structured lies beneath, unseen but very real. Above those buried mountains, the ice can be more than 1 million years old. Each thin layer of snow pressed into the next. Each year adding a fraction of a millimeter to this vertical archive of time. Inside are tiny bubbles of ancient air, dust from long-gone storms, traces of volcanic ash, even bits of material that drifted here from space. Scientists drill into that ice and pull out long cores, frozen columns of memory. They read them the way you'd read a timeline, layer by layer, season by season, world by world. They find traces of distant eruptions, shifts in temperature, even a rise and fall of greenhouse gases long before humans were around to influence them. In a sense, Antarctica is the planet's backup drive. Thinking about all of that, the hidden mountain ranges, the secret lakes, the ice that remembers centuries, makes the idea of something preserved down there feel less ridiculous. Not proven, but not completely outlandish either. If nature can keep an entire mountain range hidden, why could it hide something we haven't even thought to look for yet? Then your rational side taps you on the shoulder again. When scientists study the ice and the rock beneath it, they don't find signs of civilization. No traces of fires, no metals, no artifacts. Just a steady signature of natural change. Forests giving way to ice, warm climates cooling, oceans shifting. So, why does the fascination persist? Because evidence can say no, but the unknown still leaves room for maybe. And Antarctica is almost entirely unknown. There are places on that continent no human being has ever seen with their own eyes. Satellite images cover most of the surface, but huge areas have never been walked, touched, or explored in detail. Beneath the ice lie subglacial lakes, like Lake Vostok, that have been sealed off for millions of years. When scientists carefully drilled into one of these lakes, they found microbial life. Tiny, resilient organisms that have evolved in total darkness under crushing pressure. If life can exist there, hidden away for ages, surviving in conditions that seem almost alien, then the idea of the ice preserving other things, other stories, other traces, becomes easier to entertain. Nature has already proven that it can keep its secrets. For believers in Antarctic pyramid theories, these lakes and caverns become possible hiding places. They imagine a time before the ice, when Antarctica was warm and green, lined with forests and rivers. There's evidence that tens of millions of years ago, the continent really was a lush, temperate place. We found fossilized wood, pollen, even dinosaur remains there. Antarctica wasn't always a frozen afterthought at the bottom of the world. It once sat farther north, connected to what would later become Australia and South America. Over time, plate tectonics carried it south, and the ice began to grow, a slow, relentless conquest. That timeline leaves just enough space for myth to slip in, just enough margin for people to say, okay, but what if something intelligent came along somewhere in those millions of years? When scientists examine the evidence in detail, the fossils, the sediments, the chemistry of the rocks, they don't see anything that looks like us. No tools, no building materials, no sudden appearances of odd metals or straight lines. But the human mind, it doesn't need evidence to imagine. So the myth continues. Because even when the data points one way, the unknown keeps tugging our thoughts another. Antarctica, more than any other place, lives in that gap between what we can prove and what we can picture. All that white, all that silence, all those hidden shapes. They're like a canvas the mind can't resist drawing on. The dark peaks, the so-called Black Pyramids, sit at the center of that canvas now. Not so much as objects, but as symbols. They represent the idea that the world might still be hiding something big. That not everything old has been found, and not every question about our past has been answered. Even many scientists who roll their eyes at the wilder theories will still admit one thing. There's something undeniably beautiful about the way a trick of light, a quirk of erosion, and a few pixels from space can ignite the global imagination. It reminds us that science and mystery aren't enemies. They're partners. One explains, the other inspires, and together, they keep us looking a little bit closer at the shapes half buried in the snow. From far above, Antarctica hardly looks like part of the same planet. On satellite images, the other continents are textured with greens and browns, the blue veins of rivers, the gray smudges of cities. Then at the bottom, there's this vast, almost featureless white disk. No roads, no fields, no lights. Just ice, cracked here and there where glaciers meet the sea, like a broken plate. From that distance, the details blur together. You see the big patterns, the swirling fractures where ice shelves shear into the ocean, the long dark lines of mountain ranges poking through, the pale spirals of storms. But every now and then, a shape appears that doesn't quite fit the landscape the way you expect. A triangle here, a sharp, isolated peak there, a black wedge at the center of an endless white field. To a satellite camera, those are just nunataks, the tops of mountains sticking through the ice sheet. To a curious mind watching from bed late at night, they could be anything. Fortresses, ruins, forgotten monuments half swallowed by time. Even stripped of legend, they're still quietly majestic. They remind us that beneath that smooth white mask, the earth is busy sculpting itself. Rock rising and crumbling, valleys deepening, ice flowing like a slow river, always reshaping, always blurring the line between accident and design. Now imagine standing on one of those nunataks. The sky is a pale, endless dome. The sun spins slowly around the horizon, refusing to set. The landscape is so empty and bright that distance collapses. Things that are miles away look oddly close. Things near you seem to hover. Your depth perception starts to wobble. This is where Antarctica begins to play tricks on you. Early explorers wrote about this constantly. As they trudged across the ice more than a century ago, men like Shackleton and Amundsen described mountains that seemed to float, cliffs that looked like glass walls, towering shapes that vanished when they moved toward them. The cold Antarctic air, layered with different temperatures, bends light in ways our brains aren't used to. It acts like a lens, projecting distant objects above the horizon or stretching them into strange, elongated forms. A simple ridge, blurred by haze, can look like a smooth, sharp-sided pyramid. You can walk for hours toward what seems like a massive structure, only to have it slide away, dissolve, or resolve itself into a perfectly ordinary hill. The landscape keeps rearranging itself in your perception, even while the ice beneath you barely moves at all. That distortion doesn't stop with distance. Time starts to warp, too. In summer, the sun never really sets. It just circles the sky, turning the whole day into one long, strange twilight. Without the rhythm of sunrise and sunset, your internal clock gets confused. Hours blend into each other. A day becomes more of a suggestion than a fact. Without familiar landmarks, you lose your sense of progress as well. You can walk for what feels like forever and still be surrounded by the same rolling white. No new trees, no buildings, no curve in the road. Just a slightly different arrangement of drifts and shadows. It's easy, in that kind of environment, to start imagining things, to look at a distant triangle of rock and think, that looks too perfect. To glance at the map in your hand and wonder what else the ice might be hiding. If someone told you, you're walking over the roof of a buried city right now, you have almost no way to prove them wrong just by looking around. The surface won't help you. It hides everything. That's the strange mental space where the idea of Antarctic pyramids lives, where perception, isolation, and the unknown blur together. And yet, for all the illusions and tricks of light, there's another side to Antarctica that's even more astonishing and completely real. Beneath the ice, in places no mirage can reach, there are lakes, not frozen lakes, but pockets of liquid water, sealed under kilometers of ice, cut off in the atmosphere for millions of years. They sit in hidden valleys or depressions in the rock, warmed by a little geothermal heat from below and the pressure of all that weight from above. One of the most famous is Lake Vostok. It lies under nearly 4 kilometers of ice, roughly the size of a small country, utterly dark and isolated. For a long time, it existed only in the imagination of scientists reading radar and gravity data. Then, with careful, painstaking drilling, they finally reached it. They had to move slowly to avoid contaminating the lake with modern microbes and chemicals. When they pulled up samples from the water and the ice just above it, they found signs of life, not fish or plants, but microorganisms, tiny, resilient forms that had adapted to live in total darkness, under immense pressure, feeding on the faint energy of minerals and chemical reactions in the rocks below. To them, this was home. Normal. Just another ecosystem on Earth. To us, it looked almost alien. Finding life in Lake Vostok and other subglacial lakes didn't prove any wild theories about lost civilizations, but it did something just as important. It proved that Antarctica can preserve living systems in isolation for astonishing lengths of time. It showed that the ice isn't just a lid. It's a vault. What else that vault might be keeping, we don't know yet. Probably more microbes. Maybe fossils. Maybe some geological surprises. The odds of pyramids with hidden chambers are vanishingly small. But the odds of the ice still holding stories we haven't read, those are almost guaranteed. And that, really, is the quiet power of this place. Antarctica doesn't just invite us to imagine impossible things. It also invites us to imagine how much we still don't know, even about our own planet. It's one of the few places left where you can point to a spot on the map and say, no one has ever stood there. No one has ever looked under that ice. In a world where we're used to having satellite views of our own houses, that's rare. So the black triangles in the snow, the rumors of pyramids, the shadows people trace into uploadable mysteries, all of that sits on top of something deeper. The realization that Earth still has true unknowns. The Antarctic pyramids may turn out to be nothing more than jagged peaks caught at a flattering angle. But they've already accomplished something remarkable. They reminded us that our world isn't done surprising us. That under the smooth white surface, there are mountains tall as myths, lakes older than human memory, and ecosystems that feel like science fiction. And that somewhere between the tricks of light and the hard data of science, our imagination is still very much awake. When people first saw those strange shapes in the snow, they didn't come from a brave expedition battling blizzards. They came from above. Satellites, quietly orbiting hundreds of miles overhead, watching the planet with lenses that never blink. One day, tucked among the endless swirls of white and shadow, a certain cluster of images caught someone's attention. A dark triangle here, another there, cleanly outlined against the pale folds of ice. The kind of thing you'd scroll past without a second thought, unless you happen to pause, zoom in, and really look. Most people who saw those images at first probably just assumed they were glitches, compression artifacts, or odd bits of topography. But a few people looked longer. They saw those angles, those shadows, and felt that familiar little tug of recognition. That looks like a structure. They grabbed a screenshot, posted it, circled the triangle in red, gave coordinates, asked the internet what it thought. And the internet, being the internet, didn't stay quiet for long. Someone else found a similar shape in another part of the continent. Another person lined up distances between peaks and claimed they formed a perfect triangle. Threads appeared, then YouTube videos, then blog posts. Comments filled with phrases like alignment, geometry, and impossible coincidence. Within weeks, the idea of pyramids in Antarctica had gone from a curious question to something that, for some people, felt like a fact simply waiting for confirmation. When you look at the most shared images, it's not hard to see how the story caught on. 3 main peaks, dark, sharply defined against glowing snow. From one angle, they look almost identical in height and shape. From another, they form a rough triangle. People started measuring distances on Google Earth, finding ratios that seemed meaningful. Some claimed they matched alignments seen in places like Giza. Others pointed to star patterns. Orion's belt came up more than once. All of that is seductive, especially when you're staring at those pictures late at night with the lights off. But here's the thing, patterns for us are double-edged. We are incredibly good at seeing them, and we are incredibly bad at not seeing them, even when they aren't really there. Psychologists have a word for it, pareidolia. It's that tendency to see faces in clouds, animals in rock formations, shapes in tree bark. It's what makes us turn random static into whispers or scattered stars into constellations. Evolution wired us this way for good reasons. If you can recognize a predator's outline in the bushes a second faster, you live. If you spot patterns in seasons and stars early, you plant and harvest better. The brain that sees connections, even when they might not exist, has a survival advantage over the brain that shrugs and says, probably nothing. The problem is, that wiring doesn't turn off just because we invented satellites. So when we look at Antarctica from orbit, our ancient pattern hunting hardware kicks in. It traces lines where there might only be shadows. It highlights triangles in the chaos of rocks and ice. It turns noise into meaning. Geologists, who have to live with this illusion every day, were quick to point out a more grounded explanation. Those pyramid-like shapes, they said, are classic examples of pyramidal nunataks. Peaks shaped by glacial erosion. When glaciers carve into a mountain from several sides, they create steep, triangular faces that naturally form something very close to a pyramid. You can see similar shapes in the Alps, in Alaska, even in Iceland. No ancient builders required. Just time, ice, and gravity. From space, lit by a low sun and outlined in shadow, those forms can look stunningly geometric. But when you map them in detail, measure the angles, trace the ridges, they turn out to be far less precise than they first appear. A perfect triangle becomes a rough wedge. A sharp edge turns into a broken ridge. A neat alignment fades as soon as the camera angle changes. Still, even with all those explanations, the fascination doesn't go away. Because the more we zoom out from the images and think about the bigger picture, the more questions surface. Why do these shapes feel so familiar? Part of the answer lies in the pyramids we already know. Across the globe, time and again, human beings have built structures that share a similar basic form. Wide at the base, narrowing as they rise, stable and enduring. Egypt's pyramids, the step pyramids of Mesoamerica, the mounds of ancient China, temple platforms in Indonesia, even some of the earthworks in North America. Different cultures, different ages, same overall shape. It's tempting to look at that and think there must be a shared origin, some common teacher, a lost mother civilization that spread this idea around the world. But the more we study ancient engineering, the more a simple conclusion comes into view. The pyramid is just practical. If your building material is stone or brick or packed earth, things that don't like being stacked in tall, vertical walls, the safest, most stable way to go up is to taper inward. A wide base, narrowing as you rise, distributes weight evenly. It resists collapse. You can build impressively high without advanced tools, without steel or reinforced concrete. In other words, the pyramid isn't some secret cosmic code. It's a natural solution that humans all over the world discovered independently, working with the same physics under different skies. That doesn't make those structures any less incredible. It just means we don't need a single hidden source to explain their similarities. Still, our minds love the idea of connection. It's comforting to think everything fits into one grand pattern, that the pyramids of Egypt and Mexico and, maybe, Antarctica are all chapters in the same hidden story. Layer onto that another ancient thread, myths of lost lands, Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu, forgotten kingdoms drowned by the sea or buried in ice. These stories show up in cultures all over the world in different flavors. Sometimes they describe godlike civilizations destroyed by their own arrogance. Sometimes they hint at cataclysms, floods, fires, sudden freezes. Are they literal histories? Probably not, but they might be emotional memories. Echoes of real events, the end of the last ice age, rising seas, shifting climates, passed down through generations in the only form people had before science: story. So when a strange shape appears in Antarctica, all these threads converge. Our pattern-seeking brain sees geometry. Our fondness for connection remembers pyramids everywhere. Our old myths whisper, there was a world before this one. And suddenly, one dark triangle in the snow doesn't feel like just a mountain anymore. It feels like a clue, even if, objectively, it's not. Meanwhile, the actual record we do have, the fossils, the sediments, the ice cores, tells a quieter story. One where Antarctica has been warm and forested, yes, but tens of millions of years ago, long before humans. One where the last few million years have been cycles of ice advancing and retreating, with no trace of cities or metal or fire forged by intelligent hands. The timeline doesn't leave much room for a technological civilization under the modern ice sheet, but there's room, plenty of room, for our imagination. And maybe that's the real heart of this whole Antarctic pyramid idea. Not that it's likely to be true in the literal sense, but that it reveals how deeply we want our story to be bigger, older, and more interconnected than it seems. In a world where data is everywhere and answers are a search bar away, the thought that some secrets might still be hidden under miles of ice feels strangely comforting. Not because we need aliens or forgotten empires to be real, but because we need mystery to be real. Mystery reminds us that we haven't finished the book yet, that there are still pages we haven't turned, cores we haven't drilled, questions we haven't even learned how to ask. So the next time you see one of those images, a dark, triangular shadow in white, and feel that spark of what if, you don't have to stamp it out. You can let the question hang there for a moment. You can enjoy that little shiver of possibility, the sense that the world might still be deeper and stranger than we think. Then, when you're ready, you can bring the science back in. Let geology have its say. Let ice and erosion and plate tectonics tell their side of the story. Because in the space between those two voices, wonder and evidence, is where our best questions live. If you could peel back the snow and ice of Antarctica layer by layer, like the pages of an impossibly thick book, the story underneath would look very different from the one you see on a map. Right now, we see only punctuation marks, those dark peaks, the so-called pyramids poking up through the white. But beneath them lies the grammar of the planet itself. Slow, deliberate, and incredibly patient. Down here, time doesn't move in minutes or years. It moves in weight. The ice sitting on top of Antarctica isn't just a frosty blanket. It's a continent of its own, pressing down on the rock beneath with unimaginable force. In some places, it's close to 3 kilometers thick. Imagine a mountain made of frozen water, not just resting on the land, but pushing it down. Geologists have a name for this: isostatic depression. It's a very calm phrase for something pretty wild. The crust of the earth literally bending under the massive ice. It means the land under Antarctica isn't fixed. It's flexing. When more ice builds up, the ground sinks very slowly. When the ice melts, the ground rises back up just as slowly, like a sponge recovering its shape after being pressed. So the pyramids we see, those sharp ridges and dark faces, aren't standing still in some frozen museum. They're part of a landscape that's always quietly moving. The glaciers that cloak most of this continent act like slow-motion sculptors. Embedded in their ice are grains of rock, sand, and silt. As the glaciers creep downslope, just a few meters a year or even less, they grind those grains against the bedrock, polishing some areas, gouging others. Over time, That movement picks out certain lines, sharpens certain angles, and leaves some shapes behind simply because they happen to be in the path of least resistance. A straight edge might just be a fracture that's been smoothed. A seemingly perfect face could be two ancient valleys intersecting just right. Add low-angle sunlight and long shadows, and suddenly erosion starts to look a lot like design. The ice doesn't just carve, it hides. More than 90% of Antarctica's bedrock is invisible, buried under ice that never melts, only shifts. The flat, white surface we imagine is a mask. Under it lies one of the most complex landscapes on Earth. Ridges, basins, cliffs, and those hidden mountain ranges. Scientists don't see that hidden world with their eyes. They see it with sound and radio waves. They send radar pulses down through the ice, listen to the echoes, and slowly assemble maps of the ground far below. It's like taking an ultrasound of an entire continent. When they first did that in the mid-20th century, they found something that didn't fit expectations at all. The Gambert-Sev subglacial mountains. A full-on mountain range, as big as the Alps, completely entombed beneath solid ice. Some of the ridges in that range have shapes very similar to the peaks people call Antarctic pyramids. Sharp spines, steep flanks, triangular silhouettes. It makes sense. The same forces that carve those hidden peaks are at work on the exposed ones we see from space. If you had time-lapse vision spanning millions of years, you'd see the mountains of Antarctica breathe. Not literally, of course, but in the way peaks rise and wear down, glaciers advance and retreat, and ice sheets slide and shift. The angles we obsess over are just snapshots in a much longer process. The sharpest shapes often come from the slowest processes. Water seeps into tiny cracks in the rock, freezes and expands. Each freeze, thaw, cycle widens the split just a little. Over millions of years, those tiny expansions break apart entire cliffs. Gravity takes over, dropping fractured pieces downslope. Glaciers carry them away. What's left behind is often cleaner and sharper than anything we get from a fast, violent event. The paradox is that the slowest work produces the freshest-looking edges. That's why so many Antarctic peaks look almost newly carved, even though they're ancient. The ice sheet covering them is younger than the mountains themselves. It's been advancing and retreating over geological time, scraping, polishing, and resetting the landscape over and over. Every time the ice comes and goes, it erases some marks and leaves others. A ridge might be buried for a while, then exposed again. A valley might deepen, a slope might steepen. If you could watch it all and fast forward, the continent would seem to constantly redraw itself. And yet, some shapes persist. Certain peaks poke above the ice for so long that their surfaces grow dark. Dust blown by the wind settles on their faces. Microscopic life, algae, lichens, bacteria, clings to the rock, surviving in tiny cracks and films of moisture. These thin films of life and dust absorb more sunlight than surrounding snow, making the rock look even darker from above. To a satellite, those dark triangles stand out dramatically. They look like entrances, doorways, maybe even the tops of buried structures. To geology, there's something quieter. Survivors, pieces of rock that have managed to stay uncovered through cycles of ice and thaw. Features that have endured long enough to accumulate a visible history of their own. When we think pyramid, we think of intention. But the Earth has its own way of building pyramids without plans or blueprints. Gravity and erosion favor certain shapes. If you pile up sand or snow, it naturally settles into a rough pyramid or cone. Steep, but not so steep that it collapses. The angle changes depending on the material, but the basic form repeats itself. Same with mountains. Over long periods, slopes adjust to a balance between uplift and erosion. Too steep, and rockfalls cut them back. Too shallow, and ice and water don't carve much at all. The result, often, is a tapering form, wide at the base, narrowing toward the top. The pyramid shape, again and again, not because anyone designed it, but because the laws of physics gently push landscapes in that direction. It's a kind of natural architecture, written not in blueprints but in equations. Knowing that doesn't make the Antarctic peaks less fascinating. It just shifts where the wonder sits. Instead of asking, who built this, we end up asking, how does a world, left alone for millions of years, sculpt itself into something that looks like it was built. That's the patience of stone. To us, a lifetime is enough to build a city, write books, raise families, and feel like we've seen a lot. To the rocks beneath Antarctica, our entire species is just a brief weather pattern. They were here before us. They'll be here after. They've watched continents drift, climates flip, oceans open and close. And through all of that, they've been slowly, quietly reshaped by ice, wind, and gravity into forms that our minds now interpret as messages. A curious thing happens when you realize that the mystery of the pyramids doesn't vanish. It deepens, but in a different direction. Instead of imagining that ancient hands carved those angles, we imagine planet itself as the artist, time and pressure as the tools, glaciers as chisels, freeze, thaw cycles as a fine sandpaper on the edges. The earth doesn't need intention to create beauty. It has time, and time, given long enough, produces shapes that look like meaning. Still, people will always be drawn to the mythic version. The idea that the ice is hiding vaults and staircases and inscriptions feels more dramatic than eroded rock and isostatic rebound. It feels personal, like a message sent to us. Geology doesn't feel personal. It just is. But here's a thought that might help both sides coexist. The fact that we even see these shapes as meaningful, that we notice them, argue about them, build theories around them, is the human part of the story. The planet sculpts the peaks. We sculpt the meaning. The ice pushes down, the stone endures, and our imagination, somewhere above it all, connects the dots. So, whether we call them pyramids or nunataks, monuments or mountains, the black peaks of Antarctica are doing what they've always done, standing quietly while the world rearranges itself around them. The ice will likely cover them again someday, as climates shift and cycles continue. Then, much later, it may uncover them once more. The shapes will change slightly with every round, edges softening, slopes adjusting. But something that will persist, a faint echo of the angles we're staring at now. It doesn't matter to the rock whether it's part of a legend or a lab report. It just exists. And maybe, tucked inside that endurance, is the gentlest answer to the question that keeps pulling us back to these peaks. Not what are they, but why did we need them to be something more? When people started imagining pyramids under the Antarctic ice, they weren't just seeing triangles in satellite photos. They were hearing echoes of stories that have been drifting around in human culture for a long time. Stories about lost lands, vanished civilizations, and chapters of our past that somehow slipped out of the official timeline. The idea that Antarctica might once have been home to a civilization isn't new. It's been floating through myth, fringe books, and late-night conversations for decades. The details change, but the heartbeat is always the same. Maybe humanity's story is older and stranger than we think. Maybe there was a before we don't remember of all the old legends that get pulled into this. Atlantis is the one that refuses to go away. Not the sci-fi version with crystal generators and levitating cities, but the original story, the one told by Plato more than 2,000 years ago. He described Atlantis as an advanced island civilization beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which we now call the Strait of Gibraltar, destroyed in a single day and night of disasters. For most historians, Atlantis is an allegory, a philosophical warning about arrogance and corruption, not a travel brochure. But once the idea of a lost, advanced culture is out there, it's hard to stuff it back into metaphor. Over the centuries, people have tried to pin Atlantis onto almost every map. The Mediterranean, the Atlantic, the Caribbean, the Sahara, and eventually, naturally, Antarctica. The thinking goes something like this. If the continent was once ice-free and in a warmer position, why couldn't it have supported a civilization? And if that civilization was wiped out by a sudden freeze or a shift in the Earth's crust, its remains could now be buried beneath miles of ice. Invisible, preserved, waiting. It sounds dramatic. It also taps into a very human feeling, that what we're taught in history class might only be the surface. After all, we have found cities people thought were myths. Troy was considered a legend until ruins matching its description were discovered. The cities of the Indus Valley lay buried for thousands of years. Göbekli Tepe, a monumental site in modern-day Turkey. turned out to be far older than anyone expected, built long before agriculture was supposed to be a thing. If those places could be forgotten on dry land, what might be hiding under ice? That question is what keeps pulling Antarctica into the conversation. There's another piece that often gets mentioned alongside it, an old, controversial map called the Pyre Reis map, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral named Pyre Reis. It stitches together information from earlier charts. Parts of it seem to depict South America's coastline with surprising accuracy for the time. And near the bottom, some say it shows a southern land mass resembling Antarctica. The more dramatic claim is this, that the map shows Antarctica not only before it was officially discovered, but ice-free, its coastline drawn as if the mapmaker had access to much older, precise charts from a time when the continent was warm. Most historians push back on that. They argue that the lower section of the map probably just represents a distorted extension of South America, stretched by projection errors that were common then. Cartography in the 1500s was not exactly GPS. Still, for people who love the idea of a forgotten age of seafaring civilizations, the Pyre Reis map is irresistible. It feels like a relic, a hint, proof that someone, somewhere, long before Columbus, knew about land at the bottom of the world. Then there's the 20th century, when Antarctica became the stage for both serious science and wild speculation. As expeditions increased and nations set up research bases, stories started to spread, especially after World War II. Tales of secret tunnels under the ice, hidden bases, strange anomalies found by military aircraft. Most of these stories don't have much solid evidence behind them, but they keep showing up in documentaries and late-night radio shows. By the time high-resolution satellite images became widely accessible online, the ground was already prepared. People were ready not just to look at Antarctica, but to project onto it. The moment those pyramid-like peaks popped up on screens, they dropped perfectly into place inside a story that had been waiting for them. The bigger narrative goes like this. Across the world, ancient cultures built pyramids, aligned temples with stars, and left behind myths about floods, star visitors, and lost lands. Surely they must be fragments of a single, older story, a mother civilization that seeded knowledge, geometry, astronomy, architecture, and then disappeared. If that's true, the thinking goes, it had to live somewhere, a primordial homeland, a cradle we've forgotten. And Antarctica, remote, unreachable, and dramatically transformed by ice, makes a perfect candidate. But when archaeologists look at the actual record, the picture is simpler and, in its own way, more impressive. The pyramid, for example, doesn't need a lost teacher to explain it. If you're stacking stone without modern engineering, you quickly discover some basic truths. Vertical stone walls are unstable at large scales. Gravity doesn't negotiate. So you widen the base, narrow the top, and shift inward as you rise. You discover, by trial and error, that tapering structures stand longer and survive earthquakes better. Whether you're building in Egypt, Mexico, or China, those physical rules are the same. So different cultures, solving similar problems with similar materials, independently arrive as similar shape. Parallel invention, not necessarily shared origin. The same goes for myths. Stories of great floods, world-changing disasters, or sunken lands show up everywhere. That doesn't prove there was one single cataclysm that wiped out a single global culture. It proves that people everywhere for tens of thousands of years have watched the world change and remember that change through story. At the end of the last ice age, sea levels rose dramatically. Coastlines flooded. Low-lying areas where early humans lived would have been swallowed by water. If you were there, watching your familiar world disappear under waves, of course you'd tell that story. Of course it would become a legend. And of course, over generations, it would gather symbolism and divine punishment and cosmic drama. Myths are not lies. They're memory turned into metaphor. So where does that leave Antarctica? From a geological and climate standpoint, we know a few key things. Antarctica was once warmer, forested, and teeming with life. But that was tens of millions of years ago, long before humans. More recently, in the last few million years, its ice has grown and shrunk with natural climate cycles. The oldest traces of life found there from those more recent periods are microbial, not human. So far, We haven't found any artifacts, tools, or structures that would suggest the presence of a technological civilization under the current ice sheet. That doesn't mean we've explored everything. Far from it. Much of the continent remains untouched. But given the time frames involved, the odds get very small. Still, the myth holds power, not because it's likely, but because of what it says about us. It reveals a kind of restlessness, a suspicion that the story we've written about ourselves is too short, a hope that somewhere hidden under ice or sand or sea, there's proof that we belong to a lineage older and grander than we dare to imagine. On some level, the myth of Antarctic civilizations is less about Antarctica and more about our uneasy relationship with knowledge. We know a lot. We've dated fossils, mapped genomes, reconstructed climates, traced migrations, and at the same time, we're very aware of how much we don't know. How much has been erased by time, buried by tectonics, dissolved by oceans, or simply never recorded. So when a place like Antarctica comes along, vast, inaccessible, invisibly hiding things, it becomes a perfect screen for that feeling. If the ice could speak, it might say something brutally simple. I'm not hiding your answers. I'm just keeping my own. That might be the most honest version of this whole story. The lost civilizations we imagine under the ice haven't left ruins, but they have left a question that refuses to go away. How much of our past have we really uncovered? And how much is still sleeping in places we can't easily reach? The wind crosses those dark peaks. The satellites pass overhead. And every shadow that stretches across the snow looks for a heartbeat, like a memory we almost remember. When we talk about what might lie beneath Antarctica, we almost always start with the ice. We picture its frozen peaks, the endless white plains, the dark pyramids pushing through the snow. But to really understand what could be down there, and what probably isn't, we have to rewind. Not just a few hundred years, or even a few thousand, but far beyond human memory. Back to a time when Antarctica wasn't white at all. The Earth, as we know it now, is just one version of itself. It has reshaped its own face countless times, sliding continents around like puzzle pieces, and changing its climate over and over again. If you could flip through the planet's history like a flip book, you'd see coastlines morph, mountains rise and erode, deserts bloom and vanish. Antarctica, the frozen loner at the bottom of our globe, has not always lived there. About 200 million years ago, it was part of a supercontinent called Gondwana. Imagine South America, Africa, India, Australia, and Antarctica all joined together in a vast, sprawling landmass. No icy wasteland, no endless darkness, just a continuous continent wrapped around the Earth's southern half. Back then, what we now call Antarctica was covered not in ice, but in forests. Thick, damp forests crowded with towering ferns, mosses, and trees that never knew snow. Rivers threaded through lowlands. Swamps steamed in a heavier, warmer atmosphere. The air was humid, buzzing with life. Insects the size of birds, amphibians crawling between roots, early reptiles staking their claim as the future rulers of the land. It was not silent. It was not empty. It was as alive as any jungle. Over millions of years, Gondwana began to crack and drift apart. Africa peeled away. South America slid west. India started its long, fast journey north. Australia drifted off like a slow-moving raft. And the piece we now call Antarctica began to travel, too, downward, southward, away from the warmth and toward the pole. This didn't happen quickly. It took tens of millions of years. Long enough for entire species to appear, evolve, and disappear along the way. Even as Antarctica moved into higher latitudes, it didn't instantly freeze. Fossil evidence tells us that around 50 million years ago, during a period called the Eocene, the continent was still cloaked in dense vegetation. There were coniferous and broadleaf trees, flowering plants, mosses. Even in regions that are now buried deep under ice, we find traces of ancient soil and roots. Scientists know this because they've drilled into the seafloor around Antarctica and into sediments buried beneath the ice. In those cores, they found fossilized pollen, bits of leaves, imprints of ancient wood. Under microscopes, the structure of these fossils is shockingly clear. Tiny details in leaf veins, growth rings in wood, like pressed flowers in a book that hasn't been opened in millions of years. Those details tell us something astonishing. Average coastal temperatures weren't brutal, they were mild. In some regions, not so different from a chilly, temperate forest today. Rain fell, rivers flowed, the land breathed. If you could step into that version of Antarctica, it would feel wrong in the way a dream feels wrong. You'd be expecting ice cliffs and endless white, and instead you'd find yourself under a canopy of green, hearing the rush of water instead of the moan of wind. The fossils suggest that trees grew not just near the coast, but deep into what we now consider the polar interior. That means long periods of daylight in summer, and long periods of twilight or darkness in winter. Yet the climate was stable enough for forests to persist. No ice sheets. No frozen lakes beneath kilometers of ice. No black pyramids standing alone in snow. Just a living landscape, adapted to a very different Earth. So what changed? About 34 million years ago, the planet began to cool. Carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere dropped. The exact reasons are still debated, but it likely involved a combination of volcanic activity, chemical weathering, and changes in how carbon was stored in oceans and rocks. At around the same time, Antarctica and South America finally separated fully, opening a stretch of water we now call the Drake Passage. That narrow gap allowed a new ocean current to form, the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, a powerful ring of cold water that now swirls endlessly around a continent, effectively isolating it from warmer currents further north. Once that current locked into place, Antarctica's climate started to tip toward a new state. Mountain glaciers formed first, clinging to high ground. Then they grew, merged, and spread. Over millions of years, ice crept out from the interior until it covered almost everything we see today. Forests withered and vanished. Rivers froze. The sounds of life faded, replaced by the long, low groans of shifting ice and the howl of wind across bare rock. It wasn't a sudden apocalypse. It was more like a slow, drawn-out goodbye. And as the ice advanced, it buried that ancient world completely. The trees were buried and turned to coal and fossils. The soils froze. The river stopped flowing at the surface and moved, in some cases, to hidden channels below the ice. Scientists sometimes call Antarctica the Earth's archive, because it's one of the few places where so much of the past has been sealed rather than erased. When they drill into the ice, they're not just sampling frozen water. They're tapping into locked memories. Air from climates long gone, dust from deserts that don't exist anymore, traces of storms that blew through skies filled with different species, different forests, a different world. Sediment cores drilled from the ocean floor near Antarctica show an even older record. Layers of plankton shells, pollen grains, and chemical fingerprints that reveal when Antarctic forests flourished and when they retreated. They show the exact moments when glaciers first began to form, when the continent's edges froze, when the ice sheets thickened. This is important for the pyramid question because it tells us something about timing. The last time Antarctica was truly forested and ice-free across much of its surface, humans didn't exist. Not even close. We are talking tens of millions of years back. The ancestors of humans were still tiny, primitive mammals scurrying around in a world ruled by very different creatures. Later, during the more recent glacial cycles of the last few million years, it's possible that parts of Antarctica's coastline briefly thawed now and then. Some studies suggest that in warmer intervals, there might have been patches of tundra, moss, or even small plant communities near the edges. But even in those milder windows, the interior remained heavily glaciated. There's no evidence, no tools, no bones, no strange disturbances in the layers, that anything like a human civilization ever lived there. It's not just that we haven't found ruins. It's that the record we've found is so complete in other ways. Ice records volcanic eruptions, dust from continents half a world away, shifts in atmospheric composition. If a civilization had existed during the last few 100,000 years, especially one building large stone structures, it would almost certainly have left some kind of chemical or physical mark. We don't see that in the cores. What we do see is something quieter, but in some ways even more awe-inspiring. The clear evidence that the Earth has been cycling between warm and cold, forest and ice, ocean and land, for far longer than our species has been around to watch. Which brings us back to those pyramids. When someone says, maybe these are the remains of a civilization from a time when Antarctica was green, they're blending two different timelines into one. Yes, Antarctica was green. Yes, it hosted forests and rivers and animals, but that age ended tens of millions of years before humans. If anything built cities there, it wasn't us or anything like us, and we have no evidence that any such thing existed. But that doesn't make the story of ancient Antarctica less interesting. If anything, it makes it more haunting, because it means the ground under the ice remembers a world that we never saw. A world of dense forest where there is now empty sky. A world of flowing water where there is now frozen stillness. A world whose memory has been pressed into rock and ice, waiting for us to decipher it with drills and microscopes and careful equations. Maps, no matter how detailed, can't really capture that. They show us Antarctica as it is now, a white mass with a few ridges of gray rock. They don't show us the invisible forest that once stood there, the way the air felt, the way the rain smelled, the way the sky looked without ice reflecting all that light. Those things exist only in traces now, in fossil pollen, in bits of ancient wood, in tiny chemical signatures, and in our imagination. So when people picture pyramids under the ice, maybe what they're really doing is reaching for that older truth, that the land beneath the snow has lived many lives, that what looks dead and empty from above is actually layered with memory. Antarctica doesn't need buried temples to be mysterious. Its own history is strange enough. It remembers forests where there is now emptiness, warmth where there is now frost, life where we assume only silence. Every gust of wind across that frozen plain is passing over ground that once felt rain instead of snow. Every snowflake landing on the ice now becomes part of a story that has been building since long before we learned to tell stories at all. The myths we spin about lost civilizations might not match the facts, but the feeling behind them, the sense that something huge and ancient is hiding under that white, isn't entirely wrong. What's really hiding there is time. There was a time when the whole earth felt warm, not just the kind of warmth we think of with summer days or tropical beaches, but a deeper, heavier warmth that wrapped the planet like a blanket. The poles weren't capped with ice. The seas crept farther inland. Forests reached into latitudes that, today, are nothing but snow and silence. It's hard to picture that when you look at the Earth from space now. You see the sharp white caps at the poles, the clean edges of the continents, the dark blue of the oceans. It looks stable, almost fixed, as if it's always been this way. But for most of its long life, the Earth has been warmer than it is now. Antarctica was part of that warmth. During a time called the Eocene, roughly 50 million years ago, the planet was near one of its thermal peaks. Carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere were several times higher than today. The world was a greenhouse, trapping heat and spreading it across latitudes. Palm trees grew near what is now Alaska. Crocodiles drifted in rivers inside the Arctic Circle. The idea of polar ice caps would have sounded like science fiction. Down at the bottom of the world, Antarctica, now separated from most of its Gondwana neighbors, was still green. Sediment cores tell us that temperate forests hugged its coasts. There were shallow lakes, wetlands, mossy riverbanks. Fossil pollen from that time paints a picture of redwoods, beech trees, and other species that today feel more at home in mild coastal climates than in anything we call extreme. Animals live there, too. Small mammals, birds, and ancient cousins of creatures that would later roam other continents. They evolved under a sky that never saw a modern Antarctic winter. No months-long darkness. No minus 60 degrees Celsius nights. Just long, gentle cycles of day and twilight, wrapped in steady warmth. The air itself would have felt different. Thicker with moisture, heavier with the scent of plants and soil. Lightning, storms, rain. A lot of energy moving through the system, all the time. If someone dropped you into that version of Antarctica, with no context, you'd never guess where you were. You'd look around at the trees, hear the insects and birds, feel the mild breeze, and assume you were standing in some strange, ancient forested coastline. You wouldn't see pyramids, or ice, or miles of empty white. But warmth, as generous as it can feel, comes with its own instability. A hotter planet is a more energetic one. Storms hit harder. Rainfall patterns shift. Oceans expand. Ecosystems live closer to the edge. And slowly, quietly, the conditions that made all that warmth possible start to change. The Earth's climate doesn't sit still. It swings. Over millions of years, three big factors choreograph that swing. The composition of the atmosphere, the way the planet orbits the sun, and the arrangement of continents and oceans. The first, gases like carbon dioxide and methane, controls how much heat the planet traps. The second, small changes in tilt and orbit, shifts how that heat is distributed. The third, where land and sea sit, guides ocean currents, which move that heat around the globe. Together, these things act like the knobs and dials on a very slow, very large climate machine. When Antarctica and South America separated and the Drake Passage opened, a new current was born, a band of cold water that circles a continent, cutting it off from warmer seas. At the same time, carbon dioxide began to drop. Bit by bit, the planet slipped out of its greenhouse state and into something cooler. Ice didn't appear overnight. It started in patches. Glaciers formed along mountain slopes, expanded, and merged. Whole regions went from mossy slopes to snowfields, then to permanent ice. Over millions of years, the balance tipped. The forests retreated and vanished. The rivers froze and shifted beneath the surface. The continent that once breathed warm, wet air fell silent under a growing sheet of ice. The world exhaled, and Antarctica turned white. But that shift didn't lock things forever. Even after Antarctica froze over, the climate kept cycling between colder and warmer phases. Not as warm as those ancient forests, but warm enough at times to shrink ice sheets, raise sea levels, and change coastlines. If you zoom in from tens of millions of years to just the last million, a pattern emerges, like a faint heartbeat in the data. Ice ages advance. Ice ages retreat. Glacials and interglacials, as scientists call them, long cold stretches where ice spreads far beyond the poles, interrupted by shorter warm intervals where it shrinks back. Each full cycle takes tens of thousands of years. Those rhythms line up with tiny changes in Earth's orbit and tilt, Milankovitch cycles. The planet wobbles, leans, and drifts just enough to change how sunlight hits different regions. Summers become slightly cooler or slightly warmer. Winters soften or sharpen. The balance shifts ever so slowly, and over time, ice responds. In the ice cores from Antarctica, you can see these cycles etched into the chemistry. Layers of snow turn to ice, trapping bubbles of air from long-vanished atmospheres. By measuring the gases and isotopes inside, scientists reconstruct temperatures and greenhouse gas levels stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. What they see is not chaos. It's rhythm. Warm, cold, warm, cold. Forests spread. Forests shrink. Coastlines move. Species adapt. And through all of this, Antarctica plays a double role. A victim of climate change and a driver of it. When its ice grows, it reflects more sunlight back into space, cooling the planet further. When it melts, it exposes darker land and ocean, absorbing more heat, speeding warming. It's not just a frozen bystander. It's part of the thermostat. All of this matters when we think about myths of lost worlds and hidden histories, because it reminds us that the planet has changed more, far more, than we're used to imagining. The Earth we live on now, with its familiar coastlines and climates, is just one frame in a long film. There have been times with no polar ice at all. Times when the planet was so cold it may have been nearly frozen from pole to equator. Times when sea level was hundreds of feet higher than today. Times when giant ferns ruled. Times when dinosaurs did. Times when everything we think of as normal would have been unthinkable. So when myths speak of drowned lands, lost shores, and worlds swallowed by water or cold, they're not entirely off base. They're blurry reflections of something true. The planet is restless. It remakes itself. The difference is scale. The Ice Age cycles captured in Antarctic cores mostly took place long before civilization. Our species is young. Agriculture, cities, and written history fit into just one recent, relatively gentle warm interval, the last 10,000 years or so. We bloomed in a climate sweet spot. That's part of why the idea of civilizations before civilization feels so enticing. If the Earth has had so many phases, why not one more? Why not a forgotten chapter tucked into some older warm period? Maybe one that ended abruptly. Scientifically, the timelines don't line up. We don't see traces of humans or human-like technology in the ancient layers under Antarctica or in sediments that old. But emotionally, it still makes sense that our minds would reach for that possibility. Because we're standing on the evidence that the world has changed dramatically. That forest once stood where only ice stands now. That warmth once bathed a land we only know as frozen. Oh, you don't need pyramids to feel how strange that is. And there's another twist. When scientists compare past warm periods to what's happening now, they notice something unsettling. Yes, the Earth has been warmer before, but the transitions into and out of those warm states, driven by natural processes, took thousands of years. The warming we're seeing now is happening in decades. A blink, geologically speaking. The ice in Antarctica has seen slow transitions many times. This fast one? That's new, in a way. The myths of lost worlds and sudden collapses end up speaking to a modern anxiety. That a stable world can disappear faster than we like to think. That coastlines can move. That climates can flip. That what feels permanent is really just a long, temporary arrangement. Ancient stories say, once there was a place and then it was gone. The ice cores say, once there was a climate and then it changed. Different language, same warning. Still, there's something oddly reassuring in the deeper message of the ice. It tells us the Earth is not fragile. It's flexible. It survived meteor impacts, volcanic winters, runaway heat, frozen oceans, and shifting continents. Life has rebuilt itself after every upheaval, in new and surprising ways. We, on the other hand, are fragile. Our cities, our coastlines, our crops, our ways of life, they all depend on a certain kind of stability. On the steady, gentle climate window we've been lucky enough to inherit. So when people talk about Antarctica's hidden past, or wonder if it once held something more, maybe they're not only looking backward, maybe they're looking forward, too. Try and understand what it really means that the world has been so many different things, that the ice we see now is both an ending and a pause between versions of the planet. One day, far in the future, Antarctica might be green again. Not because of us, or at least not only because of us, but because the planet keeps cycling, responding to forces that move slowly and quietly beneath everything we do. Forests might grow where glaciers stand. Rivers might cut through valleys that are now crushed under ice. The dark peaks we call pyramids might someday overlook moss and water instead of blowing snow. By then, we may be long gone, or very different, or replaced by something else entirely. But those mountains will still be there. The stone will still remember the pressure of ice. The planet will still be telling its long, slow story. And somewhere in the deep layers beneath that future forest, a thin line of chemicals and dust will mark the age we're living in now. A brief, bright layer. A record that says, here, for a little while, there were humans. They looked at the ice and wondered what came before. When we stare at shapes in the snow or lines in stone or shadows on a glowing screen, we're not just looking at the world. We're looking at our own minds, reflected back at us. Every pattern we think we see out there passes through a filter first. Our brain, wired by evolution to notice order, meaning, and intention, even when none is guaranteed. We are built for pattern. From the moment our ancestors first looked out across savanna or up into the night sky, this ability kept them alive. A rustle in tall grass might mean nothing. It might also mean a predator. Better to assume a pattern than miss a threat. The same instinct helped them track the seasons. They noticed when certain stars rose just before dawn, when certain birds migrated, when certain plants sprouted. These weren't random details. They were clues. Over time, humans turned those clues into calendars, and those calendars into culture. The cost of that powerful skill is simple. We don't just see real patterns. We also see imagined ones. Psychologists call it apophenia, the tendency to find connections in unrelated things, and pareidolia, the tendency to see familiar forms in random shapes, faces in clouds, animals in rock formations, messages in noise. None of us are immune to it. It's the same mechanism behind seeing a rabbit in the moon, a face on Mars, or a pyramid in a mountain. Our brains are like overenthusiastic detectives. They'd rather connect too many dots than too few. Geometric shapes are especially tempting. Symmetry, straight lines, and sharp angles feel intelligent to us because they match what we create. When we build, we favor right angles and clean edges, walls, roads, towers, screens. When nature shapes things, it often leans toward curves, fractures, and irregularities, forms that don't always fit neatly into our architectural vocabulary. So when we see a triangle carved into a mountainside or a rectangular shadow in a sea of curves, our minds light up. That's ours, some deep layer of instinct seems to say. That looks like us. The pyramids of Egypt, the step temples of Mesoamerica, and the Antarctic peaks from satellite images all tap into that same recognition, even though only some of them were actually carved by human hands. We do the same thing with the sky. The stars, scattered randomly across vast distances, don't form pictures on their own. We draw lines between them. Hunters, lions, fish, scorpions, dragons. Entire mythologies grew out of those patterns. Stories layered onto code in different pinpoints of light. Once drawn, those shapes became anchors, navigation tools, seasonal markers, spiritual symbols. People projected meaning upward, and then lived as if the universe had written those meanings into the sky itself. We forget, sometimes, that we were the ones who picked the lines. And it's not just ancient stargazers. Even some of the first astronomers with telescopes fell into the same trap. When they mapped Mars, they thought they saw straight lines crossing the surface. They called them canals, imagining civilizations digging vast channels to move water across a dying world. Later, with better instruments, those lines disappeared. They have been illusions, our pattern-loving eyes connecting subtle features into straight paths that weren't really there. It's almost the exact same story we see playing out with the Antarctic pyramids, just in a different arena. Blurry data, striking shapes, a dash of mystery. Then comes the leap. Someone must have made this. The thing is, that leap isn't wrong in a moral sense. It's not a sign of stupidity or gullibility. It's just human. Our brains evolve in environments where missing a pattern could be deadly, while mistaking one for real was usually harmless. That bias is baked into how we think. We're so good at seeing intention that we sometimes apply it to places where only slow physics and chance are operating. But here's the twist. That same instinct is behind some of the best things we've ever done. The ability to see patterns where others see noise is what led to mathematics, art, music, science. It's what allowed us to notice that apples and planets seem to obey the same gravitational law. It's what lets us hear rhythm and random sounds and turn them into songs. It's what allows a scientist staring at messy data to say, wait, there's something here. Every discovery starts as a pattern we think we see. The difference between pseudoscience and science isn't the initial spark. It's what happens next. Science takes that spark and pushes it through fire. It tests, challenges, measures, and tries to break the pattern. If the pattern survives careful scrutiny, over and over by many people, it becomes part of our understanding of the world. Myth and speculation stop earlier. They're happy to live in that first exciting moment of recognition, the what if before the let's check. Both have their place. Myth feeds our sense of wonder. Science feeds our sense of truth. Our minds need both, just in different doses, at different times. The Antarctic pyramids are like a mirror held up to that balance. On one side, people tracing lines on satellite imagery, connecting dots, aligning peaks with stars, weaving narratives about forgotten empires. On the other, geologists tracing lines on elevation maps, connecting valleys and ridges, aligning features with known glacial patterns, constructing models of how ice and rock interact over millions of years. Both groups are looking at the same shapes. One says, this looks like a message. The other says, this looks like erosion. And in a way, they're both reacting to the same deep impulse, the human need to make sense of what we see. If you strip away the labels true, false, fringe, mainstream, what remains is curiosity. The trick is learning how to walk between those two modes of thinking without getting stuck in either one. To feel the rush of mystery when you see a dark triangle in the snow, and then let curiosity ask sharper questions. Are those angles really as perfect as they seem? What happens when we change the lighting or viewpoint? Do similar shapes appear in other glaciated regions? Does the geology support anything artificial beneath the ice? When those questions are asked honestly, the extraordinary tends to soften into the ordinary. But ordinary in Antarctica is still pretty extraordinary. Because even if those peaks are just mountains, they're mountains sculpted by ice and time on a scale that's hard to wrap a sleepy mind around. They're part of a continent that's been sliding across the globe, breathing forests and ice in long, slow cycles, recording the history of climate in its own frozen archives. In that light, it's almost funny that we feel disappointed when something turns out to be natural instead of supernatural, as if the slow, patient work of glaciers isn't as impressive as a lost civilization with chisels. In reality, both stories, mythic and scientific, are attempts to deal with the same sensation: awe. Awe at the age of the earth. Awe at the scope of time. Awe at the fact that we, tiny and temporary, can even ask these questions. The mythic answer says, the world is full of secrets left here for us. The scientific answer says, the world is full of processes we're still learning to understand. Both, in their own way, are comforting. One tells us we're part of a grand hidden narrative. The other tells us we're part of a grand visible one. Antarctica sits right between those two. From afar, it looks like a blank page, perfect for projecting stories onto. Up close, under microscopes and radar and careful math, it turns out to be a very densely written page, full of information about climate, geology, and life. The dark peaks people call pyramids belong to both sides at once. They are real mountains shaped by very real forces we can measure. And they are also unavoidably symbols, screens onto which we project our hopes, suspicions, and need for mystery. A scientist can stand before one of those peaks with a notebook full of data and still feel a moment of hesitation, a whisper of "this really does look uncanny." Then the training kicks in, the measurements take over, and the shape becomes numbers and models. A dreamer can look at the same peak on a screen and feel that same whisper, then follow it into a storyline about lost builders and frozen cities. Same mountain, same ice, different stories. Neither story cancels the other out completely. They just serve different purposes. One helps us sleep at night with a sense of wonder. The other helps us wake up in the morning with a sense of how things actually work. And somewhere in the middle, in that quiet overlap where wonder fuels questions and questions refine wonder, is where we get our most meaningful understanding, not just of Antarctica, but of ourselves. When science walks into a mystery, it doesn't slam the door on wonder. It just brings more tools. Antarctica is one of the clearest examples of that. For most of human history, it was a rumor at the edge of maps, a blank patch of parchment labeled with phrases like terra incognita or unknown southern land, a necessary balance, people thought, to all the continents up north, as if the Earth needed symmetry to sit straight in space. By the time explorers finally reached it, the age of myth and the age of measurement were overlapping. Compasses, sextants, and rough charts met howling winds, shifting ice, and mirages that made entire mountains appear and vanish. The first people who set foot there weren't just explorers. They were also witnesses. Their journals are full of contradictions. Accounts of careful measurements woven together with descriptions of landscapes, so strange they sound almost hallucinatory. But as the 20th century unfolded, something changed. The race to reach the poles gave way to a slower, quieter ambition to understand the poles. Temporary camps turned into research stations. Ships bristling with flags and national pride were joined by ships loaded with seismographs, drills, and the first crude radar systems. The question shifted from what's down there to what does it tell us about everything else? Today, Antarctica is one of the most studied and least understood places on Earth. At coastal bases, scientists in thick parkas and mirrored goggles tend instruments that track winds, clouds, and ozone. In the interior, small teams huddle around drilling rigs and temperatures that can freeze exposed skin in minutes, coaxing long, fragile cylinders of ice out of ground, as if they were priceless artifacts. In a sense, they are. Each ice core is like a rolled-up scroll of climate history. The layers near the top hold air from our own time, go deeper, and you pass through the Industrial Revolution, the rise of agriculture, the last few ice ages. Deeper still, and you're looking at air from periods when our species didn't yet exist. The bubbles trapped in that ice aren't just pretty. They're data. Tiny, perfect time capsules of atmosphere. Carbon dioxide, methane, nitrogen, oxygen, all preserved exactly as they were when that snow first fell. By melting narrow slices of a core and analyzing the gases, scientists can reconstruct temperatures and greenhouse gas levels going back hundreds of thousands of years. They can see when volcanoes erupted, when deserts sent dust storms swirling across oceans, when forests expanded or shrank. They can even see, faintly, the fingerprint of us, lead pollution from ancient smelting, soot from coal burning, the spike of radioactive particles from nuclear tests, the sharp curve of carbon dioxide rising more steeply in the last century than in any previous natural cycle. The ice remembers everything, even the part of the story that we're still living. And then there's what lies beneath the ice. Using radar, scientists have mapped entire river systems hidden under the ice sheet. Channels of meltwater flowing in darkness, guided by gradients in pressure and heat. They've discovered networks of subglacial lakes, some connected, some isolated, all sealed off in the atmosphere for astonishing spans of time. Lake Vostok, buried under nearly 4 kilometers of ice, is one of the largest. Others, like Lake Willans and Lake Ellsworth, are smaller but easier to reach. When researchers drilled carefully into these lakes and sampled their water, they found life, not fish or plants, but microbes, tiny, resilient organisms that have adapted to crushing pressure, total darkness, and cold that would kill most known life instantly. Some feed off chemical reactions between water and rock. Others recycle the faint organic matter that trickles down from the ice above. They're like the planet's quietest tenants, living in niches so extreme they might never have been discovered if we weren't curious enough to look. These hidden ecosystems do more than satisfy our curiosity about Earth. They also serve as test cases for life elsewhere. If microbes can survive in sealed lakes under Antarctic ice, maybe something similar could exist beneath the frozen crust of Europa, one of Jupiter's moons, or Enceladus, orbiting Saturn. In that way, every drill that bites into Antarctic ice is also knocking politely on the doors of distant worlds. There's another layer to the science of this place, too. Cooperation. Unlike almost every other region on the planet, Antarctica isn't owned by any one country. Under the Antarctic Treaty, signed in 1959, the continent is dedicated to peace and science. Military activity is restricted. Mining is banned. Nations that might argue elsewhere share data, logistics, and research sites here. In a world that often feels divided, Antarctica is a rare experiment in we instead of me. Dozens of countries maintain research stations scattered around the coast and inland. Some are large, with gyms, lounges, and small libraries. Others are little more than a few interconnected huts, humming with generators in the dark of winter. In summer, the population swells with seasonal scientists. In winter, a skeleton crew remains, cut off from the rest of the world by darkness and storms. Life at these stations is strange and simple at the same time. Days revolve around measurements, checking instruments, sampling snow, calibrating sensors, logging data. Outside, the same white stretches in every direction. Inside, people watch the same few movies, eat the same few meals, tell the same few jokes. Birthdays are celebrated with whatever ingredients are left in the pantry. Holidays are marked on paper calendars taped to metal walls. And yet, many who live and work there describe something almost spiritual in the monotony. The sense that you're not just collecting numbers, but listening to the planet breathe. Imagine stepping outside on a clear Antarctic night in winter. The sun hasn't risen in weeks. The stars, when clouds break, feel close enough to touch. Sometimes, curtains of green and purple, the aurora, ripple across the sky, silent and slow, reflections of charged particles spiraling down Earth's magnetic field. Beneath your boots, under the packed snow, lie kilometers of ice. Beneath that, rock that hasn't seen the sky in millions of years. Inside the ice are air bubbles carrying whispers of ancient atmospheres. Inside the rock are fossils from forests that no one has ever walked through. And above it all, satellites pass silently, recording everything from temperature to gravity. You are standing on top of an archive while serving as one of its librarians. That's the strange beauty of Antarctic science. It's both utterly practical and deeply poetic. Drilling, logging, calibrating. Also, we can answer questions as big as how stable is our climate? And how does life adapt to extremes? And what might other world be like? Of course, even in this world of graphs and models, the old mysteries slip in. Instruments pick up odd signals now and then. Strange patterns in gravity, unexplained warmth beneath certain sections of ice, magnetic anomalies that don't fit neatly into known geological structures. Most of them resolve into ordinary explanations as data improves. A quirk in rock composition, a glitch in equipment, an overlooked layer of sediment. But for a little while, between the first reading and the solid explanation, they live in the same gray space where the Antarctic pyramids reside. That space is important. It's where both myth and science begin. With a simple admission, we don't know yet. The difference is what you do with that admission. One path says, because we don't know, let's imagine freely. The other says, because we don't know, let's go measure. In Antarctica, those paths cross constantly. A scientist raised on stories of Atlantis and ancient maps might grow up, become a glaciologist, and end up spending their life measuring ice sheets and modeling melt rates. Their childhood wonder doesn't vanish. It just changes clothes. The dream of hidden pyramids may not survive contact with core samples and radar maps, but the feeling behind it, the sense that the world is still hiding something, does, because Antarctica really is hiding something. Just not necessarily what we first thought. It's hiding the detailed record of how climates shift. It's hiding ancient river systems and mountain ranges that existed before humans. It's hiding entire ecosystems of microbes that never see sunlight. It's hiding the long, slow memory of the planet. We don't need buried cities to justify calling it mysterious. Even the simplest fact that every snowflake falling there tonight will eventually become part of the story that can be read tens of thousands of years from now is enough. So when we look at those black, triangular peaks and let our minds drift to lost civilizations and secret structures, we're not entirely off base. We're just tuning into the right feeling and pointing at the wrong target. Yes, the peaks are mountains. Yes, the shapes can be explained by the choreography of ice and rock. But the awe they inspire, the sense that we're seeing just the tip of something bigger, that part is real. We are only seeing the surface. Beneath those peaks, beneath the ice, beneath the rock, the earth is still writing, still recording, still holding more than we yet understand. And above it all, tiny humans in brightly colored jackets keep walking out into the cold, raising instruments into the wind and asking questions, not to ruin the mystery, but to meet it halfway. Beneath the ice, beneath the rock, beneath even the slow shifting of continents, the earth keeps its own kind of memory. It isn't written in words or symbols. There are no inscriptions, no carved walls, no libraries in a human sense. Instead, there are layers of ice, of sediment, of mineral and dust. Each layer a quiet entry in a record no one intended to keep. In that sense, the planet has been archiving itself long before we ever learned to tell stories about it. Every snowfall on Antarctica adds a thin page. Every storm that blows dust across its sky leaves a sentence. Every volcanic eruption, every shift in greenhouse gases, every faint drift of salt from the sea settles gently into place, pressed down by the next season and the next and the next. When scientists drill down and pull out an ice core, they're not just holding frozen water. They're holding the compressed memory of air, light, and weather from worlds that don't exist anymore. Near the top, our world. Deeper, the worlds of mammoths and early humans. Deeper still, worlds with no people at all. The deeper you go, the less the record cares about us. It remembers temperature, not politics. Dust, not borders. Volcanoes, not wars. It records the breathing of forests, the opening and closing of oceans, the waxing and waning of ice. And somewhere near the very top of that long column, a few thin centimeters in a kilometer of ice, is the layer that holds us, our soot, our carbon, our metals, the trace of our machines, our fires, our sudden rearrangement of ancient carbon stores. To the Earth, it's just another entry. To us, it's everything. The legend of pyramids under the Antarctic ice feels small next to that, but it also feels strangely appropriate, because it's a story about missing memory, about the feeling that something is missing from the record, that there's a chapter we haven't read yet, that human history, which seems long to us, might be sitting on top of something deeper, half forgotten. In a way, that feeling is correct, just not in the way the myth imagines. We are sitting on something deeper. Not lost cities, but lost climates, lost forests, lost shorelines, lost ways the world has been itself. We're used to thinking of memory as something that belongs to brains, but the earth remembers in other ways. A canyon remembers the river that carved it. A mountain remembers a collision that raised it. An ice sheet remembers the air that froze into it. We're the ones who come along later and ask what those memories mean. When people look at those Antarctic peaks and call them pyramids, they're doing what we've always done, translating landscape into language, taking a shape carved by time, and giving it a name that ties it to our own experience. Mountain is a neutral word. Pyramid is a story. One says, this is just rock. The other says, someone meant this. And yet, even when geology steps in and explains how glaciers carve those slopes, how freeze, thaw cycles sharpen those ridges, how light and shadow on satellite images exaggerate the symmetry, something inside us resists letting go completely, because the story of just rock doesn't feel like enough. But maybe that's only because we haven't learned to hear how loud just rock actually is. A mountain like that had been standing, changing, enduring for tens of millions of years, long before humans, long before mammals looked anything like us. It has watched continents drift, climates flip, and ice come and go like tides measured in ages instead of hours. It doesn't need to be hollow to be full of meaning. It doesn't need rooms inside it to be a monument. Its very existence is a monument to time. If you could sit at the base of one of those peaks safely and quietly, you'd feel something beyond story. The air would be dry and thin, almost fragile. The silence would be so complete that your heartbeat and breath would sound loud in your own ears. There would be no trees for the wind to move through, no insects buzzing, no distant roads or engines, only the slow crack of ice shifting somewhere far away, like a house settling in extreme slow motion. Above you, the peak would rise black and sharp against the sky, so pale it almost blends into the white of the horizon. Below your feet, ice would press down on rock, and rock would press back, the two locked in a conversation of pressure that's been going on longer than we've had names. In that space, the question of whether the peak is a pyramid or a mountain might start to feel less important than something else. The feeling that you are very small and very temporary, standing on something very old and very patient. It's the same feeling people describe when they stand in old forests or at the edge of deep canyons or under a night sky far from city lights. A sense of being humbled, not in a punishing way, but in a grounding way. Antarctica amplifies that feeling because it strips everything down. No crowds, no billboards, no landmarks, just ice, rock, sky, and a quiet awareness that beneath all of it lies layer after layer of memory you can't see. That's why it becomes such a powerful mirror for us. When we imagine pyramids under the ice, we're really asking, have we been here longer than we think? Is there more to our story than we know? Could we disappear and be forgotten the way we imagine others were? Science doesn't answer those questions with comfort. It answers them with perspective. It shows us that the Earth has seen countless changes, that entire ecosystems can vanish, leaving only thin traces in sediment, that even things that feel permanent, species, climates, ice sheets, are transient. But it also shows us something gentler, that every trace does count. A single layer of ash can reveal an ancient eruption. A thin band of dust can map the reach of long-gone wind. A tiny change in gas trapped in ice can mark the beginning of a new climate phase. And in the same way, our presence, brief as it may be in geological terms, is now part of that record. The myths we tell, the pyramids, the lost lands, the ancient maps, won't be preserved in ice, at least not in words. But the actions we take, the gases we release, the ice we melt or preserve, those will. Future beings, whoever they are, might drill down into Antarctic ice and see our era as a sharp, narrow spike. A bright, thin line where carbon jumped, where something on the surface burned through old carbon stores faster than any natural process ever had. They may never know our names or our stories, but they'll know something happened. And maybe, if they're storytellers like us, they'll build myths about us too. They'll picture what we were like. They'll imagine our cities, our mistakes, our strange habit of staring at mountains and seeing pyramids, at clouds and seeing faces, at data and seeing destiny. They might whisper legends of the age when the air changed, and imagine what kind of beings could have done that. In that way, the roles flip. We become the lost civilization in someone else's imagination, and the ice, as always, keeps the neutral record. The stillness that watches us now will watch them, too. That stillness is perhaps Antarctica's most important gift. It shows us what it looks like when the world is fully itself, without people at the center of the scene. It reminds us that we are guests, not owners, participants, not authors, in a story that began long before us and will continue long after. Yet it also reveals something deeply comforting. We are not separate from that story. We are written into it, in the thin layers near the top of the ice, in the changes in air and sea and rock, in the satellites that pass overhead, and the footsteps that crunch across the snow. Even our questions about pyramids, about history, about what lies beneath, are part of how the planet knows itself through us. We are, in a way, the Earth thinking about itself, wondering about its own past, asking what it has hidden and what it has chosen to show. So as you lie there now listening, maybe in the dark, maybe with your eyes half closed, you can imagine this, far to the south, beyond any road you've ever driven. Beneath a sky that blurs into horizon, the ice is breathing slowly. Snow is falling in tiny silent flakes, adding a new layer to a record older than memory. The black peaks rise through that white, indifferent to what we call them. Mountains, pyramids, ruins, myths, satellites glide overhead, capturing images you might one day see. In laboratories lit by cold fluorescent lamps, ice cores rest in trays, waiting to be read like scrolls. And somewhere in all of that, between the myths we tell and the data we collect, between the questions we ask and the answers we can't quite reach, there's a quiet understanding that mystery and knowledge aren't enemies, that science and wonder belong together, that it's okay not to have every answer. You don't have to decide tonight whether those shapes are pyramids or peaks. You can let the question drift the way snow drifts across the ice, slowly, gently, settling into stillness. The wind will keep moving over the frozen plains. The ice will keep whispering its long, slow story. And your thoughts, one by one, can soften and fall like snowflakes into quiet. Somewhere between what we know and what we dream, between mountains and pyramids, between myth and memory, the earth keeps turning under its blanket of white. And for now, that's enough. You can rest.